a quiet archive record. Tonight, we drift into the space beneath thought, where words slow down and silence begins to speak. Simulation theory is the idea that what we call the physical world might be an artificial environment, like a computed model rather than a base reality. The thought shows up in philosophy, computer science, and pop culture, but the serious versions focus on a few hard questions. Why is the universe described so well by math? Why do physical laws look simple and consistent? Why are there apparent limits in nature, like the speed of light, quantum uncertainty, and finite information in a region of space? People who take the idea seriously do not claim it is proven. They treat it as a framework that could connect puzzles about physics, mind, and the nature of experience. If a simulated world is possible, then a second question follows. If our world is a kind of simulation, what would that imply about consciousness, memory, personal identity, and what happens when a life ends? Tonight, we go through simulation theory and what it could mean for life after death. Start with what the idea means in plain terms. A simulation, in this context, is not a video game with obvious graphics and loading screens. It is a full environment with stable rules, where observers inside it can run experiments, build technology, and form reliable expectations. If such an environment is detailed enough, it can produce minds that feel present and continuous. The crucial point is that, from inside, the experience can look normal. If a world is consistent, and if your senses and memories track that world in a stable way, then it can feel as real as anything. The reason the theory refuses to die is that it can be stated as a conditional argument rather than a claim. If advanced civilizations can run huge numbers of detailed simulations of their ancestors, then the number of simulated observers could greatly outnumber the number of original observers. If that happened, a random observer like you might be more likely to be simulated than original. This is often presented as a probability puzzle, not a religion. It does not require a programmer with a beard or a hidden control room. It only requires the possibility of computation at an extreme scale. But what is being computed? One version imagines a literal computer running a model that includes every detail of physics. Another version is more subtle. It suggests that the world is fundamentally information, and that what we call matter and energy are the surface features of that information. In that view, simulation is a metaphor for a deeper claim. The universe might be like a set of rules and relations that generate experiences, and the notion of an external machine is not necessary. To talk about life after death in this framework, we have to separate a few ideas that people mix together. First is survival of the body. That is the simplest kind of afterlife, and it is not what anyone means. Bodies break down. Cells stop. The brain stops producing the patterns that correlate with memory and speech. Second is survival of information. Even when a body ends, information about that person can remain. There are records, memories in other people, traces in the world. That is real, but it is not the same as the continuation of your point of view. Third is the continuation of subjective experience, the feeling that there is a next moment. When most people say life after death, they mean this. They mean that the stream of experience does not end, or that it begins again in some form. Simulation theory can be used to argue for the third kind, but only if you add extra assumptions. The core simulation argument does not automatically provide immortality. A simulated world can still have real endings for the minds inside it. A program can stop, a process can terminate, a memory state can be deleted. So the question is not, does simulation theory guarantee survival? The question is, does it make survival more plausible than it otherwise would be? One reason it might is that it shifts what a person is. If your mind is a pattern of information, then in principle, that pattern could be copied, backed up, restored, or instantiated again. In an ordinary physical view, a person is also a pattern, but it is tied to a specific physical brain. In a simulation view, the pattern might be portable across different substrates because the substrate is already computational. That sounds like a simple win for afterlife, but it carries a problem that shows up the moment you say the word copy. If a mind can be copied, then which one is you? If you are copied twice, do you become two people? If an exact copy of you is created in another place, is that your survival, or is it the birth of a twin who only thinks they are you? This is where the conversation has to become careful in a specific way. It cannot rely on slogans. It has to deal with personal identity. What makes you, you? Most people feel that identity is like a thread that runs through time. You were a child, then a teenager, then an adult. You changed a lot, but you feel like the same person. That feeling seems tied to continuity. Your memories connect. Your body persists. Your brain activity flows without interruption. If you are thinking about an afterlife, continuity is the first thing you lose. Death is not like sleep. Sleep includes ongoing brain activity and the potential for waking that is built into the same body. Death, as far as biology is concerned, is the end of the process that produces your mental life. So in a simulation framework, survival would likely require that the process is not truly ended, but moved, paused, or restarted. That leads to a set of possible scenarios. Scenario 1 is the backup and restore model. In this model, the system running the world keeps snapshots of the informational state that corresponds to each mind. Think of it like saving a file. When a body fails inside the simulation, the system could restore the last snapshot into a new body or a new environment. From the outside, it is like reloading. From the inside, it could feel like waking up. If that happened, would it be you? There are two angles. From a third-person view, it looks like you continue, because the pattern of your memories, traits, and habits is preserved. The restored mind says it is you. It has your history. It cares about the same people. From a first-person view, it is trickier. If there is a gap and your old process truly ended, then there is no obvious bridge from your last moment to the new one. The restored mind will feel continuous from its own perspective, but you, as the earlier stream, might still have ended. This is not a flaw unique to simulation theory. It is the same issue that appears in thought experiments about teleportation. If a machine scans you, destroys you, and builds a copy elsewhere, did you travel or did you die? People split on this. Some say continuity of information is enough. Others say continuity of the physical process is necessary. Simulation theory does not solve that argument, but it puts it on the table in a practical way, because copying information is easy in a computational setting. Scenario 2 is the branch model. In this model, the system does not keep one life per person. It creates branches. Each time you reach a point where many outcomes are possible, the system could run multiple versions. You experience one branch, but other branches exist as other instances of you. This resembles the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, but the motivation is different. It is not that physics forces branching. It is that a simulation could choose to explore possibilities. If branches exist, then death in one branch would not mean the end of all versions of you. Somewhere, a branch continues where you avoided the fatal event. This can sound like a route to immortality, often called quantum immortality in a different context. But again, identity matters. If you die here and continue elsewhere as a different branch, is that your survival? Your present stream ends. Another stream continues. The continuing stream has a life very similar to yours up to a point. It will claim it is you. It will feel it is you. If you define survival as the existence of any future person who is sufficiently similar, then branches give you survival. If you define survival as the continuation of your present stream without end, branches do not guarantee it. Scenario 3 is the replay model. This is the idea people often return to. Are we reliving this life over and over? A replay can happen in at least 3 ways. One is a literal restart. The system resets the world to an earlier state and runs it again. This could be for research, entertainment, training, or quality control. If you are inside, you would not notice unless some memory leaks through. Another is partial replay. The system might not restart the whole world. It might restart an individual mind state, like loading an earlier save of you while leaving the rest of the world moving forward in another branch. A third is statistical replay. Even if the system never repeats the same initial conditions, it could generate lives that are similar enough that they feel like the same story in broad strokes. A mind could reappear in patterns that echo, not because it is the same instance, but because the space of possible minds has themes. If replays happen, there is a question of why. A simulation would not need to repeat a run unless repetition gives some value. In science, repetition is how you test. In engineering, repetition is how you find bugs. In training, repetition is how you improve skill. If the simulation is for studying intelligence, culture, or moral choices, repeating a life could reveal how sensitive outcomes are to tiny changes. That leads to a darker possibility. A replay could be used as punishment or as a kind of forced lesson. A person could be placed into a loop until a certain outcome occurs. Some ancient myths describe repeating trials. A simulation could implement something like that without supernatural machinery. But there is also a neutral possibility. A replay could be a byproduct of optimization. If the system is searching for certain kinds of minds or outcomes, it might run many similar versions because that region of possibility produces the target. So how would replay relate to life after death? In replay, death is not final because the system can restart the run. But the same identity question returns. If the system restarts you from the beginning, is that you continuing? Or is it a new version that starts with the same initial state? In a computational sense, if the state is identical, you cannot distinguish. But subjective survival is still not a fact you can observe from outside. It is a stance you take about what matters. At this point, it helps to anchor the discussion in what we know about the mind. Consciousness, as studied by neuroscience, appears tied to brain activity. Damage specific regions and specific abilities change. Interrupt blood flow and awareness stops. Anesthesia can shut down experience in a controlled way. These facts make it hard to believe in a mind that floats free of matter, yet they do not prove that matter is fundamental. They show correlation between brain activity and experience in this world. If the brain is part of a simulation, then the brain could be the interface where the simulation produces experience. When the interface fails, the experience stops, but the underlying system might still be able to recreate it. Still, we should not smuggle in magic. If an external system can recreate your mind, it needs a method. It needs data. In biology, the state of your brain is not just a list of memories. It is a vast network of synapses, chemical balances, electrical rhythms, and ongoing feedback loops. If a simulation is detailed enough to produce a mind, then all of that detail is part of the state. Backing it up would mean capturing it. So is it plausible that such a backup exists? If the simulation is running at a fundamental level, then the system already has that information because it has to compute it. The question is whether it stores it in a retrievable way. In a large computation, you often do not store every intermediate state. You compute the present state from the previous state and discard the past. But you can store snapshots if you choose. If the purpose of the simulation includes tracking individuals, then storing snapshots becomes more likely. If the simulation is a kind of experiment on minds, the data about each mind is valuable. If the simulation is entertainment, the arcs of characters are valuable. If the simulation is training, the progress of trainees is valuable. So the possibility of an afterlife depends partly on what the simulation is for. That invites another issue. If there are simulators, then they may have values and goals. They might treat simulated beings as real moral patients, or they might treat them as objects. If they treat us as moral patients, then an afterlife could be built as a feature. It could be like a continuation environment, a rehab environment, or a place to meet others. If they do not care, there may be no afterlife at all. So simulation theory does not merely create an afterlife, it creates a question about the ethics of the outside. Now, there is a path where no external agents are needed. Some simulation-like theories suggest the universe is a self-contained computational process. In that case, there may be no designer choosing to grant survival. Survival would then depend on whether the laws of the system allow minds to reappear. This brings us to the idea of recurrence. In a finite system with finite possible states, if it runs long enough, states can repeat. This is a concept in physics and math. If the number of possible configurations is limited, then eventually you can return to a prior configuration. If that happens, a mind like yours could recur. However, recurrence does not guarantee that the repeating mind is you in the sense of continuation. It only guarantees that the pattern appears again. Still, the idea can shift the emotional picture. In a universe where patterns recur, death might not be the end of the appearance of your pattern. But whether that is comfort depends on what you mean by you. To make this concrete, consider a simple case. Imagine your brain state at one moment is captured. That state is then used to create an identical mind in a new setting. The new mind wakes up with your memories up to that moment. If you could watch this happen, you might be tempted to say you survived. But if you are the original and the process that produced your awareness ends, you might still feel that you did not make the jump. You might feel replaced. This is why some philosophers argue that there is no deep fact about personal identity. They say identity is a label we apply to a chain of related states. If the chain continues in any form, that is survival enough. Others argue that the feeling of a single point of view implies something more, like an unbroken stream. If the simulation framework is true, it might actually allow both to be true in different senses. There can be continuations that preserve your pattern, and there can be endings for each instance. So what does the theory mean for our lives after death? It offers several clusters of meaning. One cluster is practical. If minds are patterns, then preserving information about the mind becomes a route to continuation. In our world, that would point toward mind uploading, brain emulation, or other technologies. In a simulation, those technologies might already be trivial outside the sim. Another cluster is moral. If the world is run by agents, then what happens after death could reflect their ethics, their interest in us, or their indifference. A third cluster is existential. Even without a guaranteed afterlife, the idea that the world is informational can shift what matters. It can make you think of your actions as changes to a computation, ripples in a web of relations. It can make you wonder whether choice is real and whether the system nudges outcomes. That leads to a common question. If we are in a simulation, are our choices real? If the simulation is deterministic, then given the initial state, every event follows. But that does not remove the reality of decision-making as a process inside the system. When you choose, your brain state evolves. That evolution is part of the causal chain. You are still the location where certain information is processed. If the simulation includes randomness, then outcomes can vary. But randomness alone is not freedom. Freedom would be the ability of your internal process to respond to reasons, weigh options, and generate actions. That can exist in a deterministic or probabilistic system. So simulation theory does not make life meaningless by default. Meaning is about relationships, goals, and values, which can exist in any consistent world. Now focus again on death and the possibility of continuing. A key detail is that in many simulation scenarios, death could be an in-world event that the outside system treats differently from how we treat it. In our biology, death ends the organism. In a simulated environment, death could be like a condition in the model. The model might mark a character as dead, stop updating that body, and reallocate resources. Or it might keep updating the environment without that mind. But the system might still hold the data for the mind. It might keep logs of every state. It might keep a compact representation. It might keep a seed that can regenerate the mind. If so, then the afterlife could take the form of retrieval. This is where the concept of memory becomes central. When you think about survival, you often picture waking up and remembering your life. Without memory, continuation would not feel like continuation. It would feel like a new start. So any afterlife that matters to the person who died would likely include memory continuity. But memory is also a vulnerability. Memories can be edited. In a simulation, editing memory is possible in principle. If the system can write mind states, it can alter them. That raises a disturbing possibility. A person could be revived with missing parts. A person could be replayed with modified traits. A person could be placed into experiences designed to shape them. This resembles the idea of a purgatory, but in a technical form. If simulators exist and they have goals, they might treat mind states as adjustable. They could aim to reduce harmful tendencies, increase empathy, or test reactions. This would make an afterlife less like a heaven and more like a lab. But we should not jump to paranoia. The same capability could be used for care. Trauma could be softened. Painful memories could be kept but reframed. Cognitive decline could be repaired. So the meaning of afterlife in a simulation depends on governance. Who controls the system? Is it a single civilization? Is it many? Is it an automated process? Is it a nested stack of simulations where each level runs another? Nested simulations are an important part of the discussion. If a simulated civilization becomes advanced, it might run its own simulations. That produces layers. If you are in such a stack, death could mean moving between layers. Perhaps the simulators are also simulated. Perhaps the base level is unreachable. In that case, the term afterlife could refer to moving to a higher layer, or to being instantiated in a different branch of the stack. But again, nothing forces that movement. It would be a choice by some system or a rule of the stack. There is a popular image that if the world is simulated, then death is like taking off a headset. You wake up outside. That is possible in some scenarios. It would mean that your current life is an immersive experience for a person in a higher level. When this run ends, the higher level person wakes and remembers it. If that were true, it would be a kind of afterlife. But it would not necessarily be comforting. Imagine waking up and realizing your entire life was a session. Your loved ones might have been artificial characters, or they might have been other players. Your choices might have been shaped by constraints. Also, you might not be the same being outside. Your current identity could be a role. This resembles some religious ideas where earthly life is a test, but the simulation version replaces the supernatural with a technological frame. Yet there is a different possibility. You might not be a player. You might be native to the simulation. In that case, there is no outside self to wake up as. So the headset model is only one path. If you are native, then your afterlife would need to be created inside the system or by copying your pattern into another environment. To explore these options, we can map them into a few categories. Category 1 is continuation by the same process. This would mean that your mind process is not actually ended at death. Instead, the system roots it elsewhere, perhaps by changing the environment and body around it. This would preserve continuity in the strongest sense. It would be like waking from sleep. Category 2 is continuation by copy. The original ends, but a copy begins with your memories. This preserves information, but not necessarily your present stream. Category 3 is continuation by branch. You do not continue from the perspective of the dead branch, but other branches continue. Category 4 is recurrence. Your pattern appears again later due to repeats or state recurrence. Each category has a different emotional weight. If you want something that feels like survival, Category 1 is the closest. If you want your story to continue in some form, Category 2 and 3 can satisfy that. If you want the universe to be such that minds are not one-off accidents, Category 4 can satisfy that. Now, what does simulation theory say about the probability of each? Strictly speaking, it says nothing. It only opens the door, but it changes the prior assumptions. In a purely biological world, the default is that death ends experience. There is no known mechanism to restart it. In a computational world, mechanisms exist in principle, so it can raise the probability of Category 2 and Category 1. but only if the system has a reason to implement them. That brings us back to purpose. Why would a simulation exist? There are a few common ideas. One is ancestor simulations. A future civilization runs detailed models of its past. The goal could be history, curiosity, or social science. In such a model, an afterlife might not be part of the design. The goal might be to observe what people do in their natural setting. When a person dies, the data is complete. But even in this scenario, the civilization could keep copies. They might revive certain individuals to ask questions, run interviews, or verify results. Another idea is that the simulation is entertainment. It could be a kind of immersive drama. If so, afterlife could be like post-game. Characters might be reused. Story arcs might continue in sequels, but it could also be harsh. Some entertainment has no mercy. Another idea is training. A simulation could be used to train minds, test resilience, or teach ethics. If so, death could be a lesson, and an afterlife could be part of the curriculum. A person might be reset and tried again. Another idea is that the simulation is a byproduct. It is an emergent model running inside a larger computation. No one is watching. It is like a weather pattern, but for minds. In that case, afterlife is less likely unless the rules naturally produce recurrence. There is also the possibility of a moral project. A civilization might simulate beings to give them lives and experiences. They might treat it as a form of creation. If they are benevolent, they might not allow permanent ending. They might offer continuations. This sounds like a technological version of salvation. But we should be honest. Nothing about intelligence implies benevolence. So simulation theory can be both hopeful and unsettling. Now, you asked about reliving life over and over. That idea has a long history, even outside simulation talk. There is the concept of eternal recurrence, where the universe repeats. There are religious ideas of reincarnation. There are psychological experiences where time feels looped. Simulation theory can reframe these as technical possibilities. If a system is running many trials, it might rerun your life with slight changes, either to measure outcomes or to search for a certain result. It might do this without you ever knowing. Could you ever notice? If the replay is perfect and your memory is reset, then you cannot notice. If there are leaks, you might notice as déjà vu, dreams, or odd intuitions. But those are weak evidence because human memory is noisy and pattern hungry. So the replay idea is not testable from inside, unless the system leaves clear signatures. This raises an important limitation. Simulation theory often drifts into claims that cannot be tested. That makes it easy to believe anything. To keep it grounded, we should ask what would count as evidence. Some people propose that a simulation might show computational artifacts, like limits on resolution or anomalies in physical constants. But physics already includes limits and quantization that are natural. A limit is not proof of a simulation. Others point to the effectiveness of mathematics. But math being effective could be because our brains evolved to model patterns. Others point to fine-tuning of constants. But that could be selection effects in a multiverse. So simulation theory is not a strong explanation by itself. It is a wrapper that can sit on top of other ideas. For our topic, that means you should treat the afterlife implications as speculation, not as a confident promise. Yet the speculation can still be meaningful. It can push you to examine what you value about being alive. Is it your memories, Is it your relationships? Is it your capacity to learn? Is it the feeling of being a single observer? If you knew that your mind could be backed up, would you live differently? If you knew that you might be replayed, would you focus on different choices? If you knew that you might wake up outside, would you treat this life as a role or as a real story? These are not scientific questions. They are questions about attitude. Now, there is also the question of whether the simulation is local or global. A local simulation would mean only your environment is simulated, like a personal bubble. This is similar to solipsism. A global simulation would mean everyone shares the same world. Most versions assume global, because it is simpler in the probability argument. In a global simulation, other minds are likely real, and afterlife policies would apply broadly. In a local simulation, other people might be non-player characters. That would radically change the meaning of afterlife, because relationships might not be between real minds. But local simulation is less plausible, because it requires a huge amount of tailored computation for one person. Also, you have no good reason to think you are special, so most serious discussions assume other people are conscious. Now, there is another technical possibility. The simulation might not compute every detail until it is observed. This is sometimes compared to rendering in graphics. The system might generate details only when needed. Quantum mechanics has aspects that people compare to this, like measurement affecting outcomes. If this were true, then the system might not store your full brain state at high resolution all the time. It might store a compressed representation. That could make backup harder, but it could also make replay easier, because the system could regenerate a life from a seed. If your life is generated from a seed and a rule set, then the system could rerun it. This again supports replay. Now, a different angle is to consider that even in ordinary biology, the brain is changing all the time. Neurons die, synapses change, proteins turn over. The physical substrate is not fixed, yet you still feel continuous. So continuity might be less about matter and more about functional organization. If that is true, then a restored pattern could count. This is the best case for simulation-based afterlife. But even if it is possible, there is the question of motive. Why would the system restore you? It could restore you for data analysis. It could restore you for further experiences. It could restore you to reward you, or it could restore you because it is cheap and automatic. If the system is designed to preserve minds, it might do this for everyone. It might be a default policy. Minds are valuable. In that scenario, death is like a transition. So what would that transition look like? It might be immediate. Your last moment in this world ends, and the next moment is in a new setting. Or it might be delayed. The system might store you and later bring you back. From your perspective, delay does not matter if memory and identity are preserved. You might not notice time passing. The new environment might resemble traditional afterlife stories, like a place of light or reunion. Or it might be alien, like a briefing room or a blank space where you are told what happened. The environment might be customized. If the system aims to reduce distress, it might present familiar cues, or it might present raw truth. Now consider the opposite. If there is no afterlife system, then simulation theory does not help. But even then, simulation theory can still shift your view of death. If you are a pattern, then death is the end of one run of the pattern. it is not necessarily the end of the possibility of the pattern. This is similar to how a song can end, but the sheet music can be played again. Again, whether that is comfort depends on what you value. Now, we should also cover the possibility that consciousness is not just computation. Some people argue that a simulated world could reproduce behavior but not experience. They say a computer can mimic a mind without producing inner life. If that were true, then simulation theory would not guarantee that simulated beings are conscious. In that case, we might be in the base reality because we are conscious, or we might be conscious for other reasons. This debate is deep and unresolved. But if you accept that consciousness can arise from information processing, then simulated minds can be real experiences. If you do not accept it, then simulation theory loses its force. Now, there is also the question of whether any of this can be used in a way that makes predictions. People often ask for a sign that would confirm a simulation. The honest answer is that most proposed signs are either not specific or they overlap with ordinary explanations. For example, you might look for sudden inconsistencies in physics, as if the system made a mistake. But apparent inconsistencies are usually measurement limits. You might look for strange coincidences in your life. But humans are built to notice coincidence, and the world contains many opportunities for it. Some theorists have tried to connect simulation talk to the notion that the universe has a limited information capacity. In physics, there are ideas that a region of space can contain only so much information. There is also the holographic principle, which suggests that information about a volume might be encoded on a boundary. These are real topics, but they do not imply a simulation in the common sense. They might just be how the universe is. Still, thinking in terms of information can matter for the afterlife question. If the universe has an information budget, then preserving the full detail of every mind forever might be hard. That would place constraints on any continuation system. It could lead to compression. Compression is a strange concept to connect to the self, but it is worth exploring. Your mind contains huge detail, but much of it is redundant. You do not need to store every exact sensory detail to remain you. You can compress a life into traits, memories, and learned models of the world. If an afterlife system existed in a simulation, it might not preserve you at full resolution. It might preserve a distilled version. That could change what you would feel like if you were restored. You might be sharper in some ways and blurred in others. You might remember key relationships, but lose minor moments. This idea fits with how human memory already works. You do not remember your childhood as a complete recording. You remember fragments, and you rebuild the rest. Your identity does not require full archival accuracy, so a continuation after death might preserve the parts that matter for decision-making and relationships. It might not preserve every detail. That leads to another unsettling possibility. If minds can be compressed, they can also be edited to fit constraints. Some aspects could be removed, some could be merged. A continuation environment might not be a place where you remain fully yourself. It might be a place where you become a compatible participant in a larger system. Think of it as a network where minds interact more directly. Some private boundaries might fade. Some individuality might soften. People often fear that kind of outcome because it resembles loss of self. But others might welcome it because it resembles release from isolation. Simulation theory can hold both options. A system could preserve individuals as separate instances, or it could merge them into a collective model. If you want to keep this documentary, you can treat this as a question about what a future intelligent system would optimize. Would it value unique personal stories? Would it value collective stability? Would it value novelty? Would it value efficiency? If efficiency dominates, then merging and compression become more likely. If moral value dominates, then preserving individuality becomes more likely. Now consider a different way repetition could show up. You could relive your life, not because the system resets, but because your mind is used as a template for many new minds. The system could take your cognitive style and use it in other contexts. You might become a seed for a family of similar minds. Would those minds be you? Not in the strict sense, but they would carry something of you forward. That looks like a technical version of legacy. Legacy exists even in a non-simulation world. Your actions shape other people, and those effects can persist. In a simulation world, legacy could be more direct, because your mind model could be duplicated. So, in a strange way, simulation theory can make the afterlife question less binary. It is not just something or nothing. There can be many degrees of continuation. You can have full continuity with memory. You can have continuity of traits without memory. You can have continuity as a pattern that appears again. You can have continuity as influence on other minds. This can change the emotional tone of the question. It can shift it from fear of a cliff to curiosity about what forms a mind can take. It can also sharpen the urgency to understand consciousness better, because in every scenario, consciousness is the core mystery. If consciousness is a byproduct of computation, then it can be restarted. If consciousness requires a special ingredient beyond computation, then a simulation afterlife becomes less plausible. We do not know which is true, but we can look at the direction of evidence. So far, every change in consciousness we can measure is linked to physical change in the brain. That supports the idea that consciousness depends on structure and activity. It does not prove that structure must be biological. It suggests that experience is tied to organized dynamics. If that is right, then a simulated brain can generate real experience. And if that is right, then experience can exist wherever the right structure exists. So in that view, the afterlife question becomes a question of engineering and policy, not a question of supernatural law. Would a system choose to keep you running? Would it choose to pause you? Would it choose to restart you? Would it choose to let you end? From inside, you cannot force the answer, but you can decide how to live given the uncertainty. A reasonable stance is to act as if this life matters, because it does to everyone around you, simulated or not. And at the same time, to keep a quiet openness to the idea that the story might not stop at death, because in a computational frame it does not have to. If you ever did wake up after death, and if you ever did realize you had lived this life before, then the meaning would depend on what you carried forward. If you carried only the bare fact of repetition, it might feel like a trap. If you carried growth, it might feel like a long project. And if you carried neither, and the repetition happened without awareness, then it would be like weather. It would be part of the machinery of the world. So when you ask whether we are reliving this life again and again, You are really asking whether the universe treats you as a disposable event or as an ongoing process. Simulation theory cannot answer that, but it can make it clear that both are possible, and it can underline one final point. If the world is a simulation, then the things that make you human are still real in the only way they can be real. Your thoughts are real events. Your love is real as a pattern of attention and care. Your fear is real as a signal in your body and mind. Your choices are real as causes inside the system. So even if an afterlife exists, this life is not a meaningless preface. It is the data that becomes you. One more angle belongs in a documentary pass, because it comes up whenever people connect simulation theory to death. It is the idea that the system could reassign the point of view. In ordinary life, you assume that your point of view is anchored to this body, but that assumption is based on habit, not on direct proof. You never observe a point of view as an object. You only live it. If a simulation can create many minds, then there is a question of why you are this one right now. Some people treat this as evidence for a selection process. They imagine a rule that assigns awareness to one instance among many possible instances. In that kind of model, death could mean that awareness is assigned again to another mind instance, perhaps one that is already running or one that begins at that moment. This would look like a form of reincarnation, but it would not require memory continuity. It would only require that awareness is not permanently bound to one body. Notice what this does and does not give you. It does not give you reunion. It does not give you a guaranteed next scene with your name on it. It only suggests that the fact of being an experiencer might continue somewhere, in some form. For some people, that is a comfort. For others, it is not, because they care about their specific life and relationships. So even within a simulation frame, there can be an afterlife of consciousness without an afterlife of personal identity. That is the last distinction to keep in view. Consciousness is the bare fact of experience. Identity is the story and the memory that makes the experience yours. Simulation theory can make the continuation of consciousness seem less impossible, while leaving the continuation of identity as an open question. It is also worth stating the simplest possibility, because it is often ignored. Even if the universe is simulated, the system might treat individual minds as temporary processes with no continuation. It might do this for efficiency, or because the goal is to study natural lifetimes. If that is the case, then simulation theory does not change the fact that endings are real. It only changes what the world is made of. But even in that case, the fact that you can ask these questions and the fact that you can imagine other possibilities is itself a clue about the kind of system you live in. It is a system that can produce reflection. It is a system where meaning can be built, even under uncertainty. If you step back, you can see why this topic keeps returning. It touches fear and hope, but it also touches curiosity. It asks whether consciousness is a rare accident or a repeatable structure. It asks whether a life is a one-time event or a pattern that can be run again. You cannot settle it from inside the world with a single argument, but you can keep the possibilities sorted, and you can keep your attention on what you can control, which is how you live and how you treat other minds. There is another set of implications that matters to most people more than the technical details. If this is a simulation, what does it mean for how you should live? start with purpose. In a purely physical story, the universe can be indifferent. Meaning is something humans create together. In a simulation story, meaning can still be created the same way. But there is also the possibility that the environment was built with intentions. If there are intentions, then the big questions that usually belong to religion come back in a new form. Is there a creator? Is there a goal? Is there a moral direction? Is suffering part of a plan? Is there an audience? Simulation theory does not answer these questions, but it creates a space where they are not automatically ruled out. Consider the idea of God. Many religious traditions describe a reality created by a mind, sustained by a mind, and governed by a mind. A simulation, if it is built and maintained by external agents, resembles that structure. The similarity is strong enough that some people treat simulation theory as a modern way to talk about the same thing. But there are also differences. In most theologies, God is not a technician working with hardware. God is treated as ultimate, not dependent on a machine. In simulation theory, the creators might be limited beings inside a higher level world. They might be powerful relative to us, but not ultimate. So simulation theory can support a creator, but it does not automatically support a capital G God. It can also support the opposite. If the simulation is automatic, like a self-running process, then there may be no creator mind in the personal sense. This is why the connection to religion is complicated. Simulation theory can resemble theology without delivering its promises. Still, it can change how you frame classic religious problems. Take the problem of evil. If there is a good, all-powerful God, why is there suffering? In a simulation model, suffering could be explained in several ways. One is that the system is not designed to be comfortable. It is designed to be realistic. In that case, suffering is an expected outcome of running a world with physics and biology. Another is that the system is designed to test. In that case, suffering could be part of a selection process, a training process, or a way to produce certain traits. So another is that the system is designed for observation, and the observers do not intervene. Another is that the system is indifferent, and there is no moral governor outside. Each of these resembles a known religious position. The simulation frame does not make it true, but it makes it legible. Now consider prayer and signs. Many people ask whether a creator would communicate. If you are in a simulation, communication could be direct, like a message inside the world. It could be indirect, like engineered coincidences or carefully arranged encounters. It could also be absent because the creators do not want to contaminate the results. If the simulation is an experiment, then a silent creator is more plausible than an interactive one. If the simulation is care or education, then guidance is more plausible. So again, it depends on purpose. Now move to morality. If there is a creator, does that mean there are built-in moral rules? A simulation could include reward and punishment systems after death. It could include a continuation environment where choices have consequences. It could include memory review and correction, but it could also be morally empty. A simulation can be built by beings who do not share human ethics. So simulation theory does not guarantee cosmic justice. It only makes cosmic justice technically possible. This matters because many people look to an afterlife for justice, not only survival. They want wrongs to be repaired. They want cruelty to matter. In a simulation frame, justice would be a policy choice. That is both hopeful and unsettling. It is hopeful because it is possible. It is unsettling because it could be absent. Now consider whether consciousness is real. This question sounds strange, because consciousness is the one thing you cannot doubt without using it. You can doubt the world, you can doubt your senses, but you cannot doubt that something is being experienced. So in that minimal sense, consciousness is real. The harder question is, what kind of thing it is. Is consciousness just a label for information processing? Is it an emergent property of complex systems? Is it a fundamental feature of reality, like space and time? Or is it something that requires a special ingredient not captured by computation? Simulation theory intersects with all of these. If consciousness is emergent from computation, then a simulation can produce real conscious beings. In that case, your inner life is as real as it can be. If consciousness is fundamental, then a simulation may still host it. But it would mean the simulation is not the whole story. Something deeper supplies the capacity for experience. If consciousness requires a special, non-computable ingredient, then the simulation hypothesis becomes less plausible, or it becomes a hybrid where the simulation runs the world, but some deeper layer hosts awareness. This is where simulation talk meets older existential questions. What are you? Are you your thoughts? Are you the one aware of your thoughts? Are you the story you tell yourself? Or are you a process that could be instantiated in different ways? Now connect this to life after death again. If the self is a process, then the end of the body is the end of one run, not necessarily the end of the possible process. If the self is a soul-like entity that uses the body, then a simulation could be the arena where that soul-like entity plays out a life. This resembles religious dualism, but again, it is not proof. One existential topic worth exploring here is freedom. If the world is computed, is it scripted? People fear the idea of a script because it makes them feel like characters. But even in a computed world, internal deliberation can be genuine. A mind can evaluate reasons, change course, and create new plans. That process can matter, even if it is implemented as computation. So the question is not whether you are a character. The question is whether your choices are part of the causal machinery. If they are, then your life is not fake. It is a real chain of causes inside your world. Now, another existential topic is loneliness. If the world is simulated, some people fear they are alone, and others are artificial. But the more common simulation argument assumes the opposite. It assumes many observers. It assumes a shared world. So the rational position is to treat other minds as real, because you have no special reason to think you are the only real one. This leads to a practical ethical point. Even if reality is simulated, cruelty is still cruelty, because suffering is still experienced. Now consider a final religious connection. Many traditions describe a life review after death. A person sees their actions, not just as they experienced them, but as they affected others. In a simulation with full logging, a life review is easy. The system can replay your life from any angle. It can show you the consequences you never saw. If an afterlife environment exists, this could be one of its central features. It could be used for learning. It could be used for judgment. It could be used for empathy. And it could be used to decide what happens next. So, when people ask what simulation theory means for religion, one honest answer is that it can reproduce many religious motifs in a technical way. Creation, judgment, reincarnation, heaven-like continuations, and even hell-like loops. But it can also drain them of comfort, because it replaces sacred mystery with the possibility of administration, policies, logs, edits, resets. That is the emotional pivot of the whole topic. If you want an afterlife that is loving and personal, simulation theory can either support it or undermine it, depending on who or what runs the system. And if there is no one running it, then the only afterlife is the recurrence of patterns and the influence you leave behind. So, the best documentary conclusion is not a promise, it is a map. Simulation theory offers a menu of possible meanings for death. Death as a terminal event inside a model. Death as a pause before restore. Death as a branch ending while other branches continue. Death as a reset into another run. Death as waking to a higher layer. Death as a handoff of awareness without memory. None of these can be confirmed from inside with certainty, but if you take them seriously for a moment, they can still change how you look at your own life. They can make you ask what you would want to carry forward if you could. They can make you ask what kind of person you are building through your choices. And that is the question beneath it all. This was a quiet archive story, where the story ends, sleep begins,